Snow fell that night the way silent grief falls on a heart, slow, persistent, and without asking permission. The mountain wind dragged long breaths across the glass walls of Cashin Hale's winter retreat, rattling the frames as though trying to enter and sit beside him. Inside, the cabin glowed with soft amber light, yet nothing about the room felt warm. Cashin sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the half-packed suitcase on the rug. A scarf hung from its side like a forgotten memory. His phone lay face down, notifications blinking beneath the glass, each one a reminder that even on nights like this, the world still demanded pieces of him he no longer had to give. Nora, his 5-year-old daughter, lay curled under a knitted blanket nearby, her small face illuminated by the flicker of the fireplace. She watched him the way only children who understand too much do, silently, cautiously, trying not to breathe too loudly. Cashin didn't notice. He was somewhere else, replaying voices from earlier that evening. Board meetings. Legal threats. The quiet text from his ex-fiancée. "You're impossible to love like this." It sat in his chest like a stone. He rubbed his palm over his face and whispered into the room. "I don't think anyone actually stays." Nora shifted, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Daddy," she said softly. He lifted his eyes, managing a tired smile, but before he could answer, 3 gentle knocks tapped against the front door. Soft, quick, almost apologetic, as if whoever stood outside was unsure they deserved to be heard. Cashin frowned. No one should be out in this weather. He stood and walked toward the door, the wooden floor creaking beneath his steps. When he opened it, a burst of wind slapped against his chest, scattering snow into the warm air. Standing on the porch was a young woman, thin, drenched, snow-heavy braids clinging to her cheeks, her coat too light for a night like this. She held a woven basket in trembling hands. "Mr. Hale?" she asked, voice barely rising above the storm. "The lodge sent me. I cook. They said you might need someone tonight." Her eyes did not quite meet his. She spoke like someone expecting to be turned away. Her breath fogged in the doorway. The handle of the basket slipped in her numb fingers. Cashin blinked, startled. "You walked all the way here?" She nodded once. "I don't talk much," she added quickly, as though it were something that needed confessing. "But I can cook." For a moment, Cashin couldn't find words. The storm blew snow into the entryway. The young woman, Ilara Wynne, though he didn't know her name yet, stood waiting, not pleading, simply enduring, like someone accustomed to cold doors and colder silences. Nora's small voice floated from behind him. "She's cold, Daddy." Those 4 quiet words shifted the air in the room. Cashin stepped aside. Ilara entered the warmth with the careful, hesitant gait of someone who did not want to leave footprints. Her coat dripped melting snow onto the hardwood. She clutched the basket close, almost protectively, and before Cashin could offer a towel or a seat, she moved toward the kitchen as if drawn to it by instinct. He watched her, watched how she immediately tied her wet hair back, how her shoulders settled into an invisible discipline, how her hands, though trembling, found rhythm among unfamiliar utensils. She worked with the silent precision of someone who had learned not to disturb a room. But there was grace in her movements too, a soft artistry in the way she laid ingredients out like she was arranging something fragile. Peace, perhaps. Nora climbed onto a chair at the counter, chin resting on her palms as she observed the stranger. Ilara glanced at her once, then quickly looked away, shy in a way that felt more like fear than modesty. Cashin leaned against the wall, arms folded. "I didn't request staff," he said gently. Ilara didn't stop chopping. "They said you looked tired when you checked in," she murmured. "People often want warm food when they're tired." A pause. "I can cook warm food." Her voice held no pride, just fact. As though cooking was the only thing she believed she had to offer the world. The kitchen filled slowly with the scent of garlic softening in butter, steam rising in thin ribbons toward the wooden beams. The warmth seeped back into the room. Cashin felt the tension in his shoulders loosen, just a little, the way melted snow loosens from frozen branches. Ilara said nothing else. She moved around the kitchen quietly, each sound a soft contrast to the storm pounding against the windows. Nora began handing her ingredients silently. Carrots, herbs, a wooden spoon, and Alara accepted each one with a small, grateful nod. Cashin watched the interaction, something tightening in his chest. Nora hadn't smiled in days. Now, her expression eased, eyes brighter. He stepped closer. "You shouldn't have come alone at night." "It was only a mile," Alara said softly. "And no one waits for me." The sentence slipped out like an accident, and she stiffened, as though regretting she'd said anything. Cashin opened his mouth, unsure what to say to that, but the wind slammed against the glass, shaking the entire cabin. Alara flinched visibly. Something deep inside her recoiled. Instinctive, old, the kind of reaction people develop from too many hard nights. He lowered his voice. "Are you safe where you live?" Alara's knife paused midair. Her eyes stayed on the cutting board. "I work. I sleep. I stay out of the way." Another pause. "Safe isn't something I expect." Just then, the lights flickered, and the storm howled louder, as if warning them both. Cashin's phone buzzed on the counter with an unknown number. Yet another demand from the world outside. But he didn't reach for it. His attention stayed on the quiet girl in his kitchen, the storm shaking the windows like a reminder that no one should be alone tonight. Alara placed a steaming bowl in front of him. "Eat before it gets cold." He studied her face carefully, its tired softness, its guarded calm. Something inside him shifted, unknowingly, like the first crack in winter ice. Far off in the storm, a second set of knocks echoed. Not at the door but deeper, from a place inside him he had kept sealed for years. And before he could ask Alara another question, before he could understand why she looked so afraid of being here yet more afraid of leaving, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness, leaving only the sound of her quiet breath and the storm pressing harder, as though demanding something neither of them was ready for.
Dawn rose slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the fragile quiet left behind by the storm. Pale light seeped through the frosted windows of the cabin, revealing the aftermath of a night, snow piled high against the porch, icicles hanging like trembling glass along the roof, and a thin mist floating above untouched drifts. Inside, warmth clung carefully to the wooden beams, as though afraid too much heat might shatter the delicate peace. Cashin Hale woke to the faint sound of movement in the kitchen, soft clinks, a gentle stir, footsteps that barely left an impression on the floorboards. He blinked away sleep and found the fireplace still glowing with orange embers, a blanket draped over Nora, who slept soundly for the first time in days. The memory of the blackout flickered in his mind, the way the cabin went dark, the way Alara had stood frozen in the silence, breath shallow, as if the darkness carried old shadows she didn't want to meet again. He rose quietly and stepped toward the kitchen. Alara stood at the stove, her hair slightly curled from dried snow, sleeves rolled up, face calm but undeniably tired. She stirred a pot of something that filled the room with warm, earthy scents, herbs, simmering broth, a touch of sweetness he couldn't quite name. She moved like morning light, gentle, steady, unaware of the way she softened everything around her. "You didn't sleep," he said softly. She didn't turn. "I'm used to early mornings." There was a pause, one he didn't fill, because something about her demanded soft spaces, not questions. When she finally glanced at him, the early light caught her eyes, revealing an exhaustion she carried too gracefully for someone so young. "You kept the fire alive," he noted. Her gaze lowered. Nora was cold. Cashin watched her for a long moment, noticing small things he had missed the night before. The faint bruise near her wrist, the careful way she held her shoulders, the habit of anticipating needs before they were spoken. She wasn't just quiet. She was conditioned to disappear. Nora yawned loudly behind them, tiny arms stretching forward. "It smells good," she murmured. Alara smiled, not wide, not confident, but soft enough to change the room's texture. She poured warm oatmeal into a bowl and handed it to Nora without a word, brushing a loose strand of hair from the child's forehead with a gesture so instinctive it surprised even her. Nora leaned into her touch before settling at the table. Cashin leaned on the counter, studying the unfolding gentleness. "You're good with her." Alara's hands froze on the ladle for a heartbeat. "Children don't expect you to be someone you're not," she said quietly. That makes them easy to be around. He wished he could answer that with wisdom, but the truth was simpler. He envied the peace she brought into his home with nothing but silence and steady hands. You stayed when the power went out, he said. Most people would have asked to leave. She kept stirring the pot. Most people have somewhere else to go. It wasn't spoken with bitterness, just truth, delivered in her soft, nearly weightless voice. Cashin stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough that she could feel his attention. Alara, he said gently, what are you afraid of? Her grip tightened on the ladle, knuckles paling. She leaned forward slightly, as if protecting the meal from something unsaid. I'm not afraid, she whispered. Just careful. Careful. The word hung between them like a fragile ornament, reflecting more than she wanted him to see. The kettle whistled softly, breaking the tension. She poured hot water into a mug, letting steam rise between them, a gentle curtain. Cashin accepted the tea, letting its heat soak into his palms. You cook like someone who learned through necessity, he observed. She nodded. I learned because it was quieter to feed people than to explain myself. He took a sip. The warmth settled into a place beneath his ribs he hadn't realized was cold. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow, peaceful flakes drifting like feathers. The storm had softened into something more forgiving. Nora finished her bowl and crawled onto a chair beside Alara, handing her a wooden spoon she had dropped earlier. Alara accepted it with a small smile. Their stillness, the quiet child leaning against the quiet woman, was unexpectedly beautiful. What are you planning to do after today? Cashin asked, trying to sound casual. Alara placed her hands flat on the counter, fingertips brushing crumbs into her palm. I'll go back to the lodge, she said. They let me sleep in the storage room sometimes. If they need me. He frowned. Sometimes? Her shoulders lifted in a ghost of a shrug. It's better than the alternative. Which is? She hesitated. He saw the debate flash through her eyes, the instinct to hide, the desire to tell the truth to someone who might treat it gently. Finally, she exhaled. Being alone in the snow. The sentence struck him harder than he expected. He imagined her wandering the mountain paths at night, coat too thin, hands numb, carrying goodness no one had ever taken the time to recognize. He wanted to ask 100 questions, to fix the unjust shape of her life, but her gaze warned him. She didn't need rescue. She needed a place where her existence wasn't an inconvenience. He shifted the conversation. You can stay here until the storm calms, he said simply. Her eyes lifted, startled by the offer. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. The simplicity of his voice surprised even him. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked, searching for insincerity. When she found none, a fragile relief flickered in her gaze. But before she could respond, a knock thundered through the cabin. Not gentle like hers. Not hesitant. Heavy. Knowing. Alara's face drained of color. Cashin stepped toward the door, confusion tightening his chest. Nora clung to Alara's sleeve. Alara, Cashin said quietly, who would be out here this early? She didn't answer. She didn't breathe. And when the knock came again, louder, sharper, she whispered something so faint he almost missed it. Someone who shouldn't have found me. The knock reverberated through the wooden frame again, harder this time, shaking a small dusting of snow from the rafters. Alara flinched so sharply that Nora tightened her grip on her sleeve. The child sensed something wrong. Children always do, and her small fingers curled tighter, seeking reassurance from someone who suddenly could not breathe. Cashin's eyes moved between the door and Alara's pale face. Something in her expression, fear without surprise, told him this was not a stranger. He approached her slowly, careful not to spook whatever fragile trust had formed between them. Alara, who's outside? She shook her head once. Not in refusal, more like she didn't have the strength to shape an answer. Another knock followed, accompanied by a voice muffled by the wind. A man's voice. Sharp. Impatient. Alara. I know you're in there. Cashin felt something harden inside him. Nora scrambled behind his leg, peeking around him with wide eyes. Alara stepped back until her spine touched the kitchen counter, as if the cabin walls were closing in. Cashin lowered his voice. "Stay here." Then he moved toward the door with a steadying breath, his hand hovering over the handle. When he opened it, a tall man stood framed by the storm, boots buried in snow, coat dusted white, irritation carved deep into his features. The harsh wind curled around his silhouette like it favored him. "You Cashin Hale?" he demanded. Cashin didn't answer immediately. "Who are you?" "Name's Rennell. Lodge owner." His gaze swept the cabin before settling on Alara behind Cashin's shoulder. His lips twisted into something between annoyance and ownership. "You've got something of mine." Alara flinched again, and Cashin caught the movement. "She works for you," he said slowly. Rennell laughed. "Works? She owes me food, lodging, a roof. You know what happens when someone like her can't pay." He shrugged as if that explained everything. "She makes up for it by helping out, by not wandering off when she feels like it." Cashin's jaw tightened. The storm howled across the porch, blowing snow into the doorway. Rennell leaned closer. "I'll take her back now. She's trouble anywhere she stays too long." Cashin felt a flicker of anger, sharp and protective. But before he could speak, Alara stepped forward, eyes lowered, voice barely audible. "Mr. Rennell, I wasn't wandering. The lodge sent me last night." "Did they?" Rennell's tone sharpened. "Or did you take advantage of the storm to chase after something that isn't yours?" Cashin stepped between them before Alara could collapse into silence. "She's not ready to walk back in this weather," he said calmly. "And she's not your property." Rennell's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Hale. You don't know the kind of trouble she drags behind her." "I'll take that risk." A muscle in Rennell's jaw twitched. After a tense moment, he exhaled sharply and stepped back.
"Fine.
"Keep her until the storm dies down. But she's coming back." He pointed at Alara. "And you owe me a shift for this stunt." Alara nodded quickly, the way someone nods when they're used to earning temporary mercy. Rennell turned and trudged through the snow, disappearing into the white haze. Cashin closed the door, locking it instinctively. When he turned, Alara was already retreating from the room, retreating into herself. She stood near the dining table, arms wrapped around her waist, head lowered like she was bracing for an aftershock. "Alara," he said softly. "I told you I didn't talk much," she whispered, voice thin. "But people think silence means obedience, or guilt, or weakness." Cashin moved slowly, giving her space. "What does it mean to you?" She swallowed. "Safety." Nora climbed onto a chair, watching them with solemn, searching eyes. "Is he going to hurt you?" she asked Alara quietly. Alara forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No, sweetheart." Cashin knew better. There was history in her trembling, old, heavy history carved into bone. He wanted to ask, but questions felt like knives right now. So instead, he lit the lantern on the counter, filling the room with warm amber glow. "Sit," he said gently. "You haven't eaten." Alara hesitated before lowering herself into a chair. Cashin prepared tea with slow, careful motions, letting the scent of herbs and honey soften the tension. She cupped the warm mug in both hands, her fingers barely steady. "I'm sorry he came here," she said after a long silence. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's behavior." She looked up slowly, eyes shining with something unspoken. "People don't usually say that to me." Cashin sat across from her. "Well, I'm not most people." Her lips parted slightly, not quite a smile, more a fragile surprise. Nora climbed onto Alara's lap, leaning her head against her chest. Alara's breath caught, as if she didn't know what to do with such gentle trust. But her arms wrapped around Nora instinctively, protectively, tenderly. Cashin watched them both, feeling something shift inside him. A quiet understanding, a strange sense of calm, as though the cabin had found the missing piece of warmth it needed. He saw the way Alara rested her cheek against Nora's hair, the way her shoulders loosened for the first time, the way soft light touched her expression and made her look like someone who had been waiting her whole life for a moment like this. The tension in the room eased, replaced by an almost sacred silence. Cashin reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to slide a plate of warm bread closer to her. "You're safe here," he said softly. Her gaze met his, and in it he saw both gratitude and fear, like she wanted to believe him but had been taught not to trust kind words. The snow outside fell heavier. Wind curled around the cabin again, but this time, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a reminder of how small the world became when three people shared a fragile piece inside a single room. Alara lifted the mug again, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "Cashin," she whispered, almost reluctantly, "there are things I haven't told you." She paused, long enough that the lantern flame flickered between them, casting fragile shadows across her face. "But if I do, you may wish you hadn't let me stay." The lantern's flame wavered as if caught between staying and fleeing, its light trembling across Alara's face. She sat with her hands wrapped around the warm mug, staring into the steam as though her secrets might rise with it. Cashin stayed quiet. He sensed she needed the silence to piece together the courage to speak. Nora, still curled on her lap, slept peacefully, trusting the safety of arms that had not known safety themselves. Outside, the wind shifted. The storm had quieted, leaving behind a muffled stillness, as if the mountain held its breath alongside them. Alara exhaled once, shaky, controlled, then lifted her gaze to meet Cashin's. There was no protection in her expression now. No mask. Just a young woman worn thin by too much caution and too little kindness. "I didn't come here because the lodge sent me," she whispered finally. "They let me work in the kitchen, but last night, after I finished my shift, I overheard Rennell talking about sending me back." Cashin leaned forward slightly, the movement subtle but steadying. "Back where?" Her lips trembled. Not from cold, but from memory. "To the town I left 2 years ago. To the man who," she swallowed the rest of the sentence, like something sharp. "He used to own the restaurant where I worked. He didn't like it when I talked. Or when I didn't. Or when I existed in ways he didn't approve of." Her eyes shifted down. "One night, I walked away. Left everything behind. I thought he'd stop looking." Cashin felt something deep in his chest twist. "Did he hurt you?" Her silence was enough of an answer. The fire crackled softly, as though reacting to the weight of her confession. Nora stirred, but did not wake. Cashin spoke gently. "You're safe from him now." Alara almost smiled at that, almost. "Rennell knows him. They're friends. I think he made a deal 2 months ago. If he ever found me again, he'd send me back." Cashin's breath left him in a controlled, quiet exhale. He wanted to reach across the table, steady her, promise her permanence. But promises made too quickly break easily, and Alara was someone who had lived her life gathering the broken pieces of other people's promises. She continued in a whisper that shook only once. "Last night, when the storm started, Rennell told me to take food to the cabin you rented. I thought maybe the weather would hide me a little longer." Cashin understood now the trembling, the hesitation, the way she clung to the routine of cooking like it was the only thing keeping her rooted in place. "You didn't hide," he said softly. "You survived." The words met something inside her she had kept locked, and for the first time since he'd met her, her rigid posture softened into something like fragility. "But now he knows I'm here," she murmured. "And he'll come back." Cashin glanced toward the snow-frosted windows, where the storm's remnants drifted quietly. "Then let him come," he said, voice steady. "He won't take you." She blinked, startled by the conviction. Why would you want to help me?" "Because no one should face fear alone," he said simply. "Not anymore. Not you." The lantern's glow warmed her cheeks, and for the first time since stepping into his cabin, she didn't try to shrink from the light. Hours passed in a hushed equilibrium. Nora slept deeper than she had in weeks. Alara kept one hand resting lightly on the child's back, as if afraid that removing it might break the fragile quiet. Cashin sat across from her, gaze steady, presence solid but never imposing. The flames danced low, casting long shadows across the walls. Then, just as dawn hinted at the horizon, A distant crunch of snow broke the silence. Cashin stood. Alara's breath caught. He motioned for her to stay behind him and moved toward the front window. A figure approached through the thinning snowfall, broad-shouldered, brisk stride, no hesitation. Not Rennell. Someone heavier, more deliberate. Alara's face drained of color. Cashin recognized fear when it rooted itself deeply. Is that? She nodded once, unable to speak. Cashin's jaw tightened. Without looking away from the window, he lifted Nora from Alara's lap and carried her gently to the sofa, tucking her beneath the blanket. The child stirred but stayed asleep. Alara, he whispered. Go to the back room. Stay there. Don't come out unless I call for you. She hesitated, not out of disobedience, but because leaving someone to face her ghosts alone felt unbearable. But Cashin gave her a look that silenced the protest before it formed. She slipped toward the hallway, soft footsteps fading as she disappeared behind the door. Moments later, a knock thundered through the cabin, 3 heavy strikes that made the mugs clink against the table. Cashin opened the door slowly, shoulders squared. A man stood there, late 30s, cold eyes, confidence carved into his posture like he owned whatever his gaze touched. Snow clung to his coat in thick clumps, but he didn't shiver. His presence carried a weight that had nothing to do with weather. You Cashin Hale? The man asked. Cashin didn't blink. And you are? Julian Marrow. The stranger's eyes narrowed. I'm looking for a girl who's been hiding in the mountains. Hard to miss her. Too quiet for her own good. Cashin blocked the doorway with subtle intention. There's no one here by that description. Julian stepped closer, breath fogging between them. I know she's here. Rennell told me she was sent last night. Alara Wynn. She belongs to me. Cashin felt something in him snap, quietly, like a twig underfoot.
No, he said.
She doesn't. The man's jaw clenched. You're interfering in things you don't understand. Then explain, Cashin replied, voice steady as stone. What exactly gives you the right to hunt her down? Julian smirked, as if Cashin were slow. I gave her a job, a place to stay, protection. She ran. She owes me. People aren't debts, Cashin said. Julian's eyes darkened. She's trouble. Always has been.
Talks too soft.
Works too slow. Acts like she's afraid of shadows. I'm the only one who knows how to handle someone like her. Cashin's voice lowered dangerously. I don't think you know anything about her. Julian stepped forward, chest brushing the edge of Cashin's stance. Move.
No.
The man reached for the doorframe as if to push past him, but Cashin didn't budge. He was not a fighter by trade, but grief had carved him into something immovable. Julian frowned, reassessing. She won't last out here, Julian said. Women like her need someone to keep them in line. Cashin kept his voice even. Alara needs safety. Something you don't understand. Julian leaned sideways, trying to peer inside the cabin. Alara, he shouted. Come out.
Now.
No answer. Cashin stepped fully into the doorway, blocking every angle. You need to leave. Julian stared at him for a long, cold moment, measuring, calculating. Then he gave a slow, chilling smile.
Fine.
But I'll be back. And next time, the storm won't keep me from taking what's mine. He turned and walked away, boots crunching through the snow with a rhythm that echoed long after he disappeared into the trees. Cashin closed the door quietly. The cabin felt smaller now, heavy with the aftertaste of danger. He let out a long breath before calling softly, Alara. The backroom door opened slowly. She stepped out, eyes bright with fear, relief, and something unnamed, something fragile and searching. When she saw Cashin still standing, still solid, still calm, her breath trembled out of her. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. I'm not letting him take you. Her voice cracked. He won't stop. Neither will I. The admission hung between them like a candle flame, small, vulnerable, powerful. Alara's shoulders shook once, barely noticeable unless one had learned to study her closely. Cashin, she whispered, you don't know what it costs to protect someone like me. He stepped closer, not touching her, simply drawing near enough that she could feel the steadiness in his presence. "Then let me learn." A tear slid down her cheek, silent, unannounced. She didn't wipe it away.
Cashin didn't comment on it.
They stood in the quiet, facing each other like two people who had lived most of their lives bracing for harm and finally found someone willing to stand between them and the storm. Then, from the sofa, Nora stirred awake, blinking sleepily at the dim light. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. Both adults turned toward her. But before Cashin could answer, a sudden crash sounded outside, branches snapping, snow shifting violently, as if someone or something was circling back. Alara's face strained again. Cashin stepped instinctively in front of her. The sound came again. Closer. Cashin swallowed once. "He didn't leave," he murmured. "He's still out there." And as the lantern flickered violently, plunging the room into trembling shadows, Alara whispered the words Cashin already feared. "Julin doesn't give up."